Friday practice at Barcelona in Spain is over, and the fastest driver of the day was Oscar Piastri in the Mclaren. But what did we learn? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the data and doing a data analysis from Friday practice. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep. Friday in Barcelona is over, and this was the first time seeing the cars on track with the brand new front wing technical directive being put in place, and it will be interesting to see if anything changes over the coming races. But so far in Friday practice, it's a little bit early to see if anything has actually happened, but from Friday, not really anything has changed. But we could still see something change in time. I imagine when it comes to the Grand Prix, we might see some slight changes. But for now, let's compare the fastest lap from FP1 to FP2 so we can see how the times changed between the two Friday practice sessions. In FP1, the fastest lap was set by Lando Norris, and in FP2, the fastest lap was of course set by Oscar Piastri. So, the new front wing technical directive looks to have really stopped McLaren being fastest. When you take a look at these two laps, you can see that as usual how the power units have been turned up between the two practice sessions. You can also see that Piastri in FP2 is able to get back to throttle a lot easier, and that is because of course the circuit grip has increased, meaning that Piastri can push harder and the car will just stick to the track. Rather surprisingly though, Piastri is not exactly carrying more apex speed, and I think the reason for this is because Barcelona was pretty hot today, and I think the tyres were taking a bit of a beating, and the drivers couldn't really extract any extra performance without severely damaging the tyres. Between the two practice sessions, the lap times improved by approximately 1 second, and I think that was mainly down to power unit settings. So we've seen how the lap times changed between the two sessions, but now let's take a look at the top speeds that the teams are able to reach, and what can we see right now? Well, what we can see is that firstly, the top speed is a lot higher when compared to Monaco, as of course they were doing over 200 miles per hour or 320 kilometers per hour today in Barcelona, as opposed to 280 kilometers per hour in Monaco. Another thing which is rather surprising is that for the most part, they are all reaching the same top speed of about 326 kilometers per hour. The fastest car in a straight line was the Sauber of Bortoleto, who reached a top speed of 329 kilometers per hour. The slowest car in a straight line overall, and they were by quite some distance, was the Aston Martin, as they only reached 324 kilometers per hour with Fernando Alonso. It will be interesting to see how these top speeds change going into qualifying tomorrow. When it comes to the midfield then, let's talk about Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso that I just mentioned, because once again for the Spaniard in 2025, it's actually looking alright, as Alonso today was the fastest midfield driver, finishing in 7th place. Now, this could have been a glory run for the Aston Martin and the home fans in Spain, but to be honest, based on the fact that his top speed is very, very low, I don't really think that's the case. Instead, I think Aston Martin have opted to try and run a little bit more downforce than the cars around them, and I think it's paying off for them. I think that higher downforce is what we're going to see some other teams do tomorrow for qualifying, and I think the top speed is actually going to come down just a little bit for each of the teams. Anyway, for Aston Martin, this is pretty good right now, and they could be in a good position. They just need to make sure that with Fernando Alonso, they can get to the end of the race and they don't have any power unit issues like we saw in Monaco. Because, well, it would be really nice to see Fernando Alonso score his first points of the season at his home race in Spain. I just want to say if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about Ferrari. For Ferrari then, Friday in Barcelona was not their strongest day, as Charles Leclerc was P5 and half a second away from the fastest time of the day, and teammate Lewis Hamilton looked to be really struggling with the brakes once again, and he finished in 11th place and was over 7 tenths behind Piastri. Not only was Ferrari not looking amazing over one lap, but they also looked to be struggling just a little bit with the tyres. At least that's what it looked like with the soft compound for Charles Leclerc. But how did that compare to, well, let's say the Red Bulls? Well, let's take a look at the long runs then of Charles Leclerc and compare it to Max Verstappen, who both did race runs on the soft tyres. And what can we see here? Well, when you look at these two laps on their race runs, their pace is actually pretty similar, and honestly, this might actually give Ferrari some hope, and I might have just been a little bit harsh on saying that they looked pretty poor. They looked to have very similar pace to Red Bull and Max Verstappen. However, that being said, Verstappen was stuck behind Charles Leclerc for a number of laps, and I'm not sure how much of it was pace and how much of this time on the softs was just Max Verstappen being stuck at Charles Leclerc's pace. But that being said, if we don't know, all we can say for now is that Red Bull and Ferrari are looking pretty similar in terms of race pace, right? Well, like I said, I do think Ferrari don't have the pace of Verstappen and Red Bull, and I do think Verstappen would have had better pace if he wasn't stuck behind Leclerc for as long as he was. Ferrari also need to improve their qualifying pace going into Saturday. P5 was okay, but Hamilton being in P11 would not be good enough at all for him. For Red Bull then, it was a very positive day, all things considered. The Barcelona circuit is one that suits their car quite nicely, and Max Verstappen will be able to extract even more performance from his car tomorrow, because of course, as always, Red Bull tend to have things turned down more than their rivals. They were third and just 3 tenths off of Piastri, which for me is really positive for them, because of course of that reason that I just said. Red Bull tend to find more pace than anyone else going into Saturday, and they also tend to have things turned down more than their rivals. Let's compare then the fastest laps of Oscar Piastri to Max Verstappen, so we can see where the differences were between them. And when you look at these two laps, you can see what we see all too often, which is that Red Bull are struggling more in slower corners. Piastri and McLaren do have the advantage in that area, and you can see that through turns 1, turn 4 and turn 10, as the McLaren just turns better than the Red Bull. As I mentioned though, I expect that Red Bull had things turned down slightly more than McLaren, and we will see them move forward more on Saturday. With that in mind, I expect that we will still see Max Verstappen fighting for pole position. For Mercedes then, it was actually a pretty good FP2 session for them, all things considered. After the last couple of race weekends, where it looked like they were all of a sudden nowhere, George Russell ended the day in P2, and Kimi Antonelli was 6th fastest. This can give a lot of optimism and confidence for the Silver Arrow that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Let's now compare the lap time of the two Mercedes drivers so we can see where the differences were between them. And when you take a look at the two laps, the main areas where Antonelli is losing the time, rather surprisingly, is not the high speed corners like turn 9 like we tend to see. Instead, it is the tight turn 5 where Kimi Antonelli seems to lose time. The other area where Antonelli loses out is the final couple of corners, which of course are higher speed corners. For Mercedes though, this is overall an improvement from them, and it will be interesting to see if they can keep it up, or if they just had things turned up more than their rivals. Finally, for McLaren then, it doesn't really look like right now that the new technical directive for the front wing has hurt them in any way whatsoever, like some were thinking, as they just topped both practice sessions. And going into the weekend, I always thought Red Bull would be stronger than them, and based on practice, it looks like it will be very close between them. But I still expect McLaren to be edged out by Max Verstappen. That being said, it was a very positive day, and we have seen how strong Piastri looks. But now, How are they looking when it comes to the longer runs? Well, let's compare the race runs of Piastri to Verstappen, and what can we see here? Well, what we can see is kind of tricky, because Verstappen uses 2 sets of tyres. But early on, when both of them are on the mediums, it looks as though their pace is looking very, very similar. It will be interesting to see if McLaren has increased tyre wear during the stints. During these practice stints, McLaren's lap time dropped by 1.7 seconds. I still think Max just has the edge, but this will be very, very close and exciting to watch. So with that in mind then, what are my predictions for qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix? Well, in P5 I'm going to go for George Russell in the Mercedes. P4 will be Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P3 will be Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. P2 will be Lando Norris in the McLaren. And I'm still going to go for Max Verstappen to take pole position. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.